One morning, I noticed this metallic taste in my mouth that lasted a week and then subsided. At first, I wasn't alarmed by this odd taste until it started getting worse and not going away. It went from metallic to foul to jarring. I made an appointment with my ENT. After she checked my mouth, she said, "Looks good. I don't see any sores or irritation. I'm going to prescribe the magic mouthwash for you. It should knock out whatever is bothering your throat." Well, with a name like Magic Mouthwash, I had high hopes. But it didn't make a difference. So I called the ENT office back and they suggested imaging. I checked the computer where through a link I have access to all my tests and procedures. Many times I get the results before the doctor, which might not be a good thing. I obsessed about getting the imaging results, and finally it showed up. Summary: poorly defined mass lesion in the left base of tongue, and pathologic, most consistent with metastatic disease. I read this many times before I became hysterical. I immediately called the office. "I just saw the result and it looks like I have a tumor and cancer and who knows what's else. What's going on?" "Yes, I understand. They told me not to worry." Me? Not worry? I don't think that's possible. They said a bunch of doctors were looking at the results, and I had an appointment the following week. Did I dare send these results to anyone else before I had something definitive from the doctor? In my wildest fantasy, I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as the write-up. I'm not a doctor, so why should I make assumptions about what I read? I think the worst word was metastatic, and second place would be mass lesion. Of course, my next mistake was to research the test results on Google. This should be a crime. Talk about inducing nightmares. No, no, no. How could it be worse? I had to tuck whatever I read into a faraway place in my brain. At first, I only shared the devastating news with my husband, Neil. He was calm and optimistic, but I wondered if he understood what was happening. After going catastrophic, full throttle for a week until I met the doctor, I expected the worst news possible. My husband Neil went with me to the doctor's office. When I mentioned the name of this doctor to the other physicians in the group, the responses had all been the same. He's the best. If I ever had a throat problem, that's who I would go to. The doctor was engaging and clearly explained what he suspected from the imaging. First, he felt my neck, and then he used a light to get a better look at the inside of my mouth. He kept saying, "Can you open wider?" I tried my best. The key things he told me were, "Looks like HPV cancer. It's been hitting people who never smoked. Michael Douglas had it. Completely curable. We'll use radiation and chemotherapy for treatment." I squeezed my husband's hand like a vice, but I didn't break down in tears. I was numb, despite expecting this. After all, he did say curable. Then he said, "I want to do something like a biopsy using a needle through your neck. I'll numb the area so you shouldn't feel much pain. I want to be sure it really is HPV." It was just the idea of plunging that needle into my neck that freaked me out. Results would take a week. Another test of my patience. Afterwards, as we left the office, heading toward Neil's car, I finally broke down, and that triggered Neil to also burst into tears as we stood there and hugged. I told him, "I had anal warts when I was 20, and I believe that HPV is the same thing. It's funny. But I always thought that the guy who gave me those warts saved my life. I never wanted to have anal sex after that, so I was never at risk of getting AIDS. Now it's possible that this same HPV has come back to bite me in the throat with cancer. I guess you can't win. Calling my friends and relatives about my diagnosis came next. I have to tell you, I did not appreciate a common response of, "Oh, my husband went through the same thing." I did not want a preview of coming cancer attractions. All my relatives, my literary editor and friend, Michael Maine, lifelong friend Cy, my good friend Charlie, they all came to my aid. And I can't forget my wonderful friend Janet, along with classmates and teachers and synagogue rabbis and congregants who all sent healing vibes. And of course, my sister was my knight in shining armor. She would see me through this hell. It would be another 2 weeks before radiation and chemotherapy would begin. I couldn't believe this was happening. I would look in the mirror and ask myself, does Gordon really have cancer? Is it even possible that I'm that sick? During this waiting period, I was fitted for a headpiece that would direct radiation to my tumor. After all, you don't want radiation to go to a healthy part of your head and neck. When I met with the doctors, they kept telling me the good news is that this cancer is curable. The bad news is that the treatment is grueling. You may be a lucky one who doesn't suffer side effects, which include pain when swallowing, nausea, exhaustion, or weight loss. There are 35 weeks of radiation, Monday through Friday. Chemotherapy is weekly for 7 weeks. You're very thin, Gordon, so you should try and gain weight. Eat all those things you want. Don't worry about it being healthy. And pain-wise, we want to start you on pain medication well in advance of when it hits. That way your body can adjust to it. Oh, and one last thing. Don't expect to feel good when you finish treatment. The side effects that you will experience until you reach radiation summit will be harrowing. Your body will be building up to your final dose. And after radiation and chemo cease, the descent down will be slow, and in some cases, 2 weeks of hell. I understood the warning, but I never imagined what it would actually be like. The first comment from the pain doctor when we met was, "Do you realize what you're in for? Radiation and chemotherapy at the same time?" It was great what I would be going through. I kept telling my brain not to register any fear or catastrophic projections. And surprisingly, my brain cells listened to me for once in my life. Treatment day was on the horizon, with radiation and chemo on the same day. Wednesday was D-Day. In the radiation room, I was comforted by the diversity of ages, but I wish I could have avoided the elephant in the room, COVID. In the waiting room, I found that half the population there were masked up. It sort of made sense that having cancer meant your immune system was compromised. But I have severe hearing loss, and I read lips. And it was like traveling back in time when COVID was roaring, and I had not understood what any masked marauder was telling me. Now it was more of a calamity when my health was involved. One missed word might mean the wrong medication or the wrong diagnosis. The old technique that I had used when I would just agree with whatever was being said might be deadly now. Amazingly, I got by. When I checked in for my initial radiation treatment, I wondered if I would feel the rays trying to kill the cancer cells. A myriad of machines hovered over me as they affixed the headpiece on my neck and head, tight enough to qualify for a bondage setup. And when I heard the instructions, there will be times when you have to stop swallowing and not move, I thought, what's the big deal? Unfortunately, I had not realized that swallowing was such a common activity. And then, when I had constant phlegm and it felt like I was going to choke, staying still and not swallowing were quite problematic. They had to start from scratch, and if I moved or swallowed, they had to start again. But I did eventually conquer this dilemma for the remainder of the sessions. A few hours later, chemo would be coming. I'd gotten a port installed in my right upper arm so the nurse wouldn't have to search for a vein to draw blood or when giving me the infusion. The doctor warned me, if you're going to have any reaction to the infusion, it won't happen for a couple of days. The chemo room was made up of single, private partitioned rooms. I had expected a community of patrons having chemo injected into their veins, making friends with one another, commiserating about the treatment. I said to myself, thank goodness I love to read. It's impossible to feel lonely when you're reading. Again, like the radiation, having the chemo drugs pumped into my port was painless. I felt nothing. But then, the next evening, it happened. I was at my kitchen table, staring into space as I tried to drink my nutrition drink for dinner. My stomach was having a fit, and my stomach was talking to me. This stuff is vile. Don't you dare take another sip. You really think you'll be able to finish this? I know food takes awful, but you have to eat or you'll lose weight. I had never known my stomach to have such a long conversation with me. Now I had to eat, and as I held the container near my mouth, I felt a spasm. Something was traveling up my esophagus. Uh-oh! Not a good sign. My brain told my feet to start walking, no, running to the bathroom. I hoped that a release and relief were coming once I hugged the toilet bowl. I went through my 4-letter vocabulary, and for added effect, I cried. But relief never came, only my stomach's communication. There is nothing more to barf. I know you're disappointed that you don't feel better, Gordon, but at least the nausea has subsided. Remember, I warned you about drinking any more of that stuff. Okay. I decided I would go on a hunger strike. What was I going to tell Madison, my nutritionist? Madison stressed. Since you aren't eating anything else, you'll need to consume 6 bottles of your nutrition drink a day. I wanted to scream, never in a million years. I'm sorry, I'm nauseous. By the 3rd week, when side effects flourished, my weight dropped from 128 pounds. It was time to consider a feeding tube. The doctor agreed. A little awkward to have this tube jutting out from my stomach, but I could live with that. But the evil forces weren't done with me. I felt a strange type of nausea while I was recovering from the feeding tube insertion, different from the reaction to the chemo. The nausea was painful and unrelenting. I kept throwing up. I used moaning or uttered ear-piercing shouts. I expected neighbors would knock on my door to see if I was being murdered. I wanted to be put out of my misery. Oh, yes. There were times that I told myself, I can't do this anymore. It's not worth it. Now, I understand why some of my friends couldn't handle radiation or chemotherapy. Fortunately, those feelings were fleeting, and I trudged on, or as a writer friend of mine said, just stay the course. Still, I felt hopeful having the feeding tube. I no longer had to worry about tasting and swallowing. My stomach would get nutrients and liquefied food directly. I told my abdomen, you better behave yourself. You can't complain that I'm not chewing my food. You won't go hungry. And just when I thought nothing worse could happen, came the hiccups. Now, I've had issues with hiccups before that lasted way beyond their useful life. Usually when I breathe differently after I've had a cold, but now the hiccups felt uncontrollable. End of part 1.